Wanted, large brown bear, suspected in pie snatching and purloining of picnic baskets. Ranger Smith in hot pursuit. Perpetrator known as Yogi. May meet accomplice called Boo Boo. Be on the lookout and may try to hide out at Nickelodeon.
Yogi's on Nickelodeon. Yeah. He's smarter than the average bear. Yeah.
This video is brought to you by Patreon. Patreon, for the enjoyment and benefit of the people. In 1986, Turner Broadcasting Systems purchased the struggling Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer/United Artists, or MGM-UA, for $1.5 billion. This turned out to be more than Ted Turner could really afford, and he and his company would end up selling back most of MGM Studios and production assets. The one thing Turner kept, however, was MGM's pre-1986 film library, which was quite extensive thanks to previous purchases and mergers, including Warner Bros.' pre-1950 film library. This gave Turner a lot of toys to play with, and we'd get things like colorized Casablanca and the 24-hour Christmas Story marathons out of it. There was also a great deal of classic theatrical animation, including 161 Tom and Jerry shorts, 337 Looney Tunes shorts, and 231 Popeye shorts. That's a lot of shorts, but it's not quite enough to say create a dedicated animation cable channel. That changed in 1992, when Turner purchased the television library of Hanna-Barbera, the creators of Scooby-Doo, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Huckleberry Hound, Snagglepuss, and one Yogi Bear. Over 100 television shows. Yeah, that'll do it. On October 1st, 1992, Turner Broadcasting premiered Cartoon Network to various cable packages across the United States. While it would eventually expand with original animated programming, it started off as the home for classic animation in cable. But what if it hadn't been? What if the Hanna-Barbera purchase hadn't gone through? Where would you go if you were in the mood for some retro cartoon goodness in the early 90s? And what would it look like? For a few brief years, right before Cartoon Network took off, it looked like Nickelodeon was going to fill that niche. It started with Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon in 1988, tapping into a different library than the one Turner had. It's a long story. Check out the Looney Tunes video for more. Looney Tunes did very well on Nickelodeon, and starting in 1990, they would make vintage animation a regular presence for the channel, much as they did for vintage sitcoms. On October 1st, 1990, Hanna-Barbera would touch down on Nickelodeon for the first and only time, providing us something of an alternate timeline, a vision of what might have been if Cartoon Network hadn't gobbled everything up. This is Nickelodeon's most wanted, Yogi Bear.
Yogi and Boo Boo Yogi and Boo Boo Yogi and Boo Boo weekdays on Nick. Yogi and Boo have nothing to do but get into trouble. Weekdays on Nick.
Yogi's a big galoot.
Boo Boo is awful cute. Together they spend their days searching for food. Cakes, pies, chicken pies.
Catch Nickelodeon's most wanted, Yogi Bear.
Weekdays on Nick.
Oh yeah.
Yogi Bear. He's smart, he's hungry, he's stylish. Yogi spends his days at Jellystone National Park, a very active destination for campers and tourists, which is perfect for a bear that has grown quite fond of sandwiches, pies, and whatever else you might find in those picnic baskets.
Welcome to Jellystone Park, folks. I'll just have to check the food you're bringing in. I am the health inspector. Health inspector? Why, you're a bear. You're very observant, sir. But you see, we're short-handed, and we all pitch in and help in any way we can.
Give him the basket, John. He might get vicious.
Okay, Inspector. Here, everything looks okay, but we can't be too sure for the wife and kiddies, you know.
He's often joined in his attempts at mischief with his reluctant little pal Boo Boo, who tries so hard to be the voice of reason, but what can you do against an ego as big and a stomach so large?
Come on, Yogi. We'll melt into the forest and hunt for natural bear food. Nuts and berries, birch bark, sassafras roots.
Yuck. My stomach cringes from that stuff.
How about honey, Yogi?
Honey? No, that's more like it, Boo. Let's look alive and find a beehive. Yay!
Yogi's antics are often at odds with Ranger Smith, who doesn't hate the talking bear. Sometimes they get along quite well, but he has a duty to keep the park's visitors happy and safe, and so the two find themselves at odds. Hijinks ensue, and Ranger Smith gets steamed.
I know you just had a picnic basket. Where is it?
Careful, sir. If you can't prove that, I could sue you for slander.
Aha!
What aha, sir?
A piece of chocolate cake on your collar. How about that?
Sorry, sir, but you haven't one crumb of evidence.
Ooh, that Yogi.
Rounding out the cast is Cindy Bear, Yogi's sometimes girlfriend, who has an inexplicable attraction to the big guy, which he's receptive to only sometimes.
Yoo-hoo, Yogi! I brought you a little bundle of joy.
Oh no! My dream is gonna turn into a scream!
What's the matter with Yogi? I just brought a ham for supper.
And that's pretty much it. Yogi Bear is one of those simple, easy to understand characters that's flexible enough to plug into basically any story. Classically, they would focus on things actual bears might encounter. A hunter might show up and Yogi will have to outwit them to save another woodland creature. Sometimes Yogi will be prepping for hibernation when an annoying little duck crashes his place. But then sometimes Prohibition-era gangsters will try to hide out in Yogi's cave, or Boo Boo will win a trip to Paris, or they'll stumble onto a genie in the lamp.
And who are you, sir?
I am the genie of the lamp. And please, no cracks about genie with the light brown hair. I've heard it 1,000 times. I am the servant of whoever has the lamp.
Here, Yogi, I don't need any servants.
The characterization and visual design of Yogi was based on Art Carney's character, Ed Norton, in the early sitcom hit The Honeymooners. Yogi borrowed Norton's hat and sing-song manner of speaking, as originally voiced by Dawes Butler.
I sail over the wall, the parachute pops open, and old Yogi floats to the ground like a fallen leaf. I knew it would work.
And it's this simplicity of character that's given Yogi Bear decades of longevity. And while Scooby-Doo is inarguably the biggest property created by Hanna-Barbera, Yogi Bear is the nearest thing the company has to a mascot in the vein of Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny. And to explore the history of Yogi Bear is to explore the history of Hanna-Barbera, so let's roll back the clocks. It's history time. William Hanna and Joseph Barbera were both rising directors in the 1930s animation scene when they first crossed paths at MGM. Hanna had gotten his start at Herman Ising Productions, the original creators of Looney Tunes before Leon Schlesinger took over, while Barbera had come out of the early days of Terrytoons. At MGM, the two men were given desks across from each other, and they quickly developed a working relationship and friendship, and it wouldn't be long before they started developing new cartoons for the studio. When I led on to the others in the studio that Bill and I were developing a cat and mouse cartoon, we were greeted with a universal chorus of jeers and raspberries. A cat and a mouse? How unoriginal can you get? And how much variety can you milk out of such a hackneyed, shop-worn idea? How many cat and mouse cartoons can you make? That hackneyed, shop-worn cat and mouse cartoon ended up being Tom and Jerry, MGM's biggest cartoon franchise. Between 1940 and 1958, Hanna and Barbera would joint direct 114 Tom and Jerry classics, 13 of which were nominated for the Academy Award for Best Cartoon Short, 7 of which won. Tom and Jerry won more Academy Awards than Bugs Bunny or Mickey Mouse. And those awards went to the producer, Fred Quimby, who had virtually nothing to do with the shorts. Quimby would retire from MGM in 1955, and the two friends would take his place as head of MGM's animation department. However, this would be short-lived, as MGM closed the animation studio in 1957. Theatrical animation was dying with the rise of television. While most companies tried to pivot to TV with various levels of success, MGM just went, we've got a big enough cartoon library, let's just run those in syndication and call it a day. This was against the wishes of Hanna and Barbera, who had argued in favor for television animation, and had even moonlighted for various TV projects, including commercials and the animation for the original opening of I Love Lucy. I keep telling you, it's the most important TV show ever, and I keep proving myself right. So with MGM Animation shut down, the two men were free to pursue this brand new television market, striking a deal with Screen Gems, the television arm of Columbia Pictures, and developing their own company, HB Enterprises, rebranded in 1959 as Hanna-Barbera Productions. Their first program was The Rough and Ready Show, about a dog and a cat who were best pals, helping each other out from one adventure to the next. Hanna-Barbera quickly realized that animation for television would have to work in very, very different ways. The television cartoons were radically different from what I had been doing for almost the last 2 decades, in that they revolved around stories rather than variations on a simple chase, and they therefore required dialogue. One of the great glories of Tom and Jerry was, of course, the lushness of the art and animation. Without this quality, which was impossible on a television budget, the sustaining power of the new cartoons had to come from somewhere else. The ability to evoke audience response is a primary index for gauging the prospective success of any cartoon show, and every member of the cast must be an effective contributor. From a general standpoint, we wanted our characters to have a pleasing and congenial appearance that would appeal to children. I love these 2 quotes, because it shows off how these 2 men thought in different but complementary ways. Joseph Barbera being the big idea man, and Bill Hanna being the technical how do we get this done guy. The division of labor came naturally and automatically. I came up with the characters and created or supervised the creation of the storyboards. Then I directed the recording of the track. Once this was done, I handed the track and storyboards to Bill, who timed the scenes and distributed them, complete with track and model charts, to the animators. Instead of relying on slapstick and rapid-fire gags, these television efforts would have to lean on fun, well-defined, appealing characters. Truthfully, Rough and Ready weren't that interesting themselves, but the show had a colorful cast of guest characters and villains. Chickosaurus, a prehistoric chicken monster. Big Game Hunter, Harry Scary, the robot mastermind of the planet Mooney Moolah. If the animation has to be stiff and cheap, the least we can do is have the characters be memorable. This became the driving philosophy of Hanna-Barbera going forwards. Characters first, story second, animation third. Which is not a diss. Hanna-Barbera was not the first company to do television animation, and a lot of their contemporaries were running into the same limitations of budget. This was a time for experimentation. This was the time for clutch cargo, where a static drawing was given actual human mouths. Compared to things like that, Hanna-Barbera was a step above. One of the most well-known techniques they developed was giving their characters things around their necks, like bow ties, necklaces, and in the case of a certain cartoon bear, a collar with no shirt. What these things allowed was a separation of a character's head from the rest of their body, allowing just the heads to be animated while the bodies remained static. You didn't have to redraw the entire character for every syllable.
After you, my pal Boo-Boo.
Not me, Yogi. The ranger station is off limits to we bears.
I never read the rule book, Boo-Boo. It only spoils my fun.
Speaking of syllables, the Rough and Ready show also brought in 2 of Hanna-Barbera's biggest voice actors. Ruff was voiced by Don Messick, the third voice of Droopy Dog, who would go on to play Boo-Boo, Ranger Smith, Bam Bam from the Flintstones, Astro from the Jetsons, and good old Scooby-Doo.
Well, in many cases, they're much younger children who don't understand that there are real people behind the character voices. And so usually they're kind of excited to learn that that's how the magic comes about.
Reddy was played by Daws Butler, who played the reoccurring Droopy villain Butch, and would, of course, go on to voice Yogi Bear, as well as Huckleberry Hound, Snagglepuss, Quick Draw McGraw, and Elroy Jetson.
Well, golly, Yogi, how come we both got away from Jellystone Park at the same time?
Yeah, I don't know, but you found that little road map, and we hit the road, and here we are.
Yeah.
Yay! Beverly Hills.
Hanna-Barbera's second program, The Huckleberry Hound Show, premiered in syndication on September 29, 1958, with tie-in advertising for Kellogg's breakfast cereal. The first truly classic Hanna-Barbera character, the titular Huckleberry, with his trademark bow tie and South Carolina drawl, was a sort of everyman character who would pop in at any time and in any role. There was also Pixie and Dixie and Mr. Jinx, another cat and mouse cartoon from the people who made the de facto cat and mouse cartoon, but the real breakout star would be the show's third cartoon.
Excuse me, sir. I don't believe we met yet. Don't you recognize me, Hook? Not under that disguise, Yogi. You knew, didn't you? Why, sure. You're one of the stars of the show. And the same goes for you, too. Aw, shucks, folks. Everybody's a star on the Huckleberry Hound show, so let's go!
Between Huckleberry Hound's second and third seasons, Yogi Bear would be spun off into his own show, The Yogi Bear Show, premiering on January 30th, 1961, again with a strong Kellogg sponsorship.
Hey, new Kellogg's Okays. Note the improvement? They put a bear on the box, which improved it so much, they decided to improve the cereal, too.
Oh, come on, Yogi. Let's be serious about Kellogg's new Okays, okay?
Like the Space Bears say, hey, okay.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up this guy, one Yogi Berra, catcher and power hitter for the New York Yankees between 1946 and 1963. He would end up suing Hanna-Barbera for using the obvious spoof of his name to sell breakfast cereal. Hanna-Barbera insisted it was a coincidence, but I mean, come on. Yogi Berra wasn't some obscure minor player. He was a major athlete in one of the biggest sport teams of that era, a future Hall of Famer known for his odd witticisms. He's the guy who coined the phrase, "It ain't over till it's over." This would be like if someone today made a cartoon bird named LeBron J, slapped it all over some cornflakes, and then insisted they had no idea who LeBron James was. Yogi Berra dropped the lawsuit, and Yogi Bear was allowed to exist. And when Yogi Berra passed away in 2015 at the age of 90, the Associated Press accidentally called him Yogi Bear. Welp, Hanna-Barbera continued to expand, and the 60s would be huge for them, starting with the Flintstones in 1960, the first animated show made for primetime, and ending with Scooby-Doo Where Are You in 1969, the biggest franchise to come out of the company. Plus, Top Cat, The Jetsons, Johnny Quest, Peter Potamus, Adam Ant, Secret Squirrel, Space Ghost, Birdman, The Banana Splits, Wacky Races, and many, many more. It's easy for a bear to get lost in all of this. In 1964, Hanna-Barbera made their first theatrical film, Hey There, It's Yogi Bear, which was also the first film based on an animated television show. After this, however, Yogi would take a 8-year hibernation, sticking with syndicated reruns. In the 1970s, Hanna-Barbera pivoted away from constantly coming up with new IPs, though they still made up plenty of new IPs like Speed Buggy and Jabberjaw, and instead focused on variances and major crossover events. Yogi Bear would return in Yogi's Ark Lark, a 1972 television special in which an all-star cast of Hanna-Barbera characters teamed up to take on pollution while in a giant flying ark. This would be Yogi's main role in the company for the next 2 decades, as a ringleader for all of these colorful characters. Between 1972 and 1989, Yogi Bear would feature in 6 TV shows, 2 of which took place in space, and 10 television specials, including 3 Christmas specials, which includes 1 crossover with Casper the Friendly Ghost. You could argue that Yogi was a bit oversaturated going into 1990, but at least everybody had heard of him. He still had marquee value, which was perfect for Nickelodeon. It's possible that Nickelodeon's show started off as an actual new Yogi Bear show and not a package show of older cartoons. In his biography, My Life in Toons, which was published in 1994 but was written a few years earlier, Joseph Barbera makes mention of a show in development called Jellystone's Most Wanted, Yogi the Fugitive Bear, which is just way too close to be a coincidence. Digging deeper, I found some concept art and doodles from the studio that went up for auction in 2013. Did Nickelodeon try to commission an original Hanna-Barbera show? Or was it always going to be a compilation show, but they changed the name? If it was going to be an original show, it wouldn't have been the only cable-exclusive Yogi Bear content that year. 1990 also saw Wake, Rattle, and Roll, a show for the Disney Channel that included a segment called Fender Bender 500, a race cartoon starring Hanna-Barbera characters, meaning for about 3 months, you could catch Yogi Bear on both Nickelodeon and the Disney Channel. Nickelodeon's Most Wanted, Yogi Bear, the show we actually got, collects its shorts from 3 different sources: The Huckleberry Hound Show, The Yogi Bear Show, and The New Yogi Bear Show. Premiering on September 12, 1988, The new Yogi Bear show was an attempt to go back to basics for the character. After spending so much time in space and competing in sports events with Scooby-Doo and Captain Caveman, it was nice to get back to Jellystone Park, stealing picnic baskets and riling up Ranger Smith.
An automatic robotic sensation, my own computerized creation, the Predaterminator.
Yogi, that sure is a weird name.
What's wrong with Yogi? The Ranger calls me Yogi all the time.
This marked the first time Yogi Bear wasn't voiced by Daws Butler, who sadly died of a heart attack on May 18, 1988, at the age of 71. He was officially replaced by Greg Burson, who also took over a lot of Mel Blanc's roles after his passing, including Bugs Bunny.
Bon appetit. Yeah, can I help you? Pardon us, sir. Us gourmet-type bears hoped you'd have some food to spare. Some caviar, crab legs, maybe a little quiche Lorraine.
Unfortunately, Burson was a major alcoholic, and in 2004 he drunkenly held one of his roommates hostage at gunpoint, and a SWAT team had to be called in. Nobody was hurt, but as you can imagine, that kind of behavior will get you blacklisted in the entertainment profession. And Greg Burson would pass away 4 years later. But back in 1988, Burson was just getting started, and the new Yogi Bear show was about as good a start as any. Some classic Yogi Bear stories. Uh-oh, Yogi and Boo Boo are in a hot air balloon. Uh-oh, rude neighbors are interrupting Yogi's hibernation. Uh-oh, Yogi has been challenged to a duel by, Ninja Raccoon. Oh boy.
Ninja says you're too fat and too slow.
The throwback nature of the show meant that it fit in pretty seamlessly with the classic Yogi Bear cartoons of the late 50s and early 60s. Perfect for Nickelodeon's Yogi Bear mixtape of a show. On its own, however, the new Yogi Bear show didn't get much of anywhere, only running for one 45-episode season. This was the fate of a lot of Hanna-Barbera shows. Many one-and-dones over 3 decades, which did quite a bit to devalue the brand as cheap and disposable. 1982 would see an animation strike in an attempt to assure animation production stayed local in the United States, as more and more studios were outsourcing their animation to Japan and Korea. Compared to the animation strike of the 30s and 40s, this one got virtually no buzz, and the nearly 10-week strike failed. Hanna-Barbera's animation would be largely outsourced not long after. By all accounts, Hanna-Barbera was a busy but fun place to work, but the business side of things meant it was becoming less and less of a great place for job security. The company had already gone through a couple of owners, first bought by Taft Broadcasting in 1966, which was purchased in 1987 by the American Financial Corporation, probably the least sexy company name in the history of the universe. In 1989, several of the remaining staffers, including Tom Ruegger, were scouted out by Warner Brothers to work on a new Steven Spielberg-headed project, Tiny Toon Adventures. The company puttered on into 1990. In 1991, Hanna-Barbera would make their final Yogi Bear show, Yo Yogi, presenting a youngified, hip, modern Yogi Bear, following the success of a pup named Scooby-Doo. This kind of thing worked well for Scooby-Doo, less so for Yogi Bear.
Oh, a wise guy, huh? I'm taking your name.
Only if you promise to give it back.
That does it! You're banned from this mall for life!
Outside of a few TV specials in 1994, this would be the last we'd see of Yogi Bear for nearly 2 decades. American Financial Corporation, God, I hate saying it so much, decided to sell the animation studio in the midst of Yo Yogi's production. Turner Broadcasting would outbid MCA and Hallmark, spending $320 million on the studio and library, finally giving them enough material to kick off Cartoon Network. And when it came to running Cartoon Network, there was really only one place to scout from, one company with people experienced in children's cable television. Cartoon Network's first president would be Betty Cohen, who had served as Nickelodeon's director of on-air promotion and interstitial programming from 1984 to 1988. After more than 30 years basically inventing television animation, Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera finally stepped down as the head of Hanna-Barbera, sticking around in symbolic roles, but not really being involved with production of new cartoons. Studio operations would be handed over to Fred Siebert, the MTV Network's executive who had a major hand in Nickelodeon's rebranding from the Silver Ball era to the Orange Splat era. Under Turner, Hanna-Barbera would produce shows like Dexter's Laboratory, Johnny Bravo, and the Powerpuff Girls, and their cartoon assets would be repurposed into comedic remixes with Space Ghost Coast to Coast, C-Lab 2021, and Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, developing the Adult Swim brand. Time Warner would merge with Turner Broadcasting in 1966, and in 2001, the Hanna-Barbera studio would officially close its doors. Bill Hanna would pass away in 2001, and Joe Barbera would pass away in 2006. Warner Brothers took over productions of Hanna-Barbera's IPs, with most of the effort going towards Scooby-Doo projects. Yogi Bear would get a less than well-received live-action movie in 2010. You know, this movie gets a bad rep. I don't know, it's fine. Some of the CGI compositing is weak, and Tom Cavanaugh has no screen presence whatsoever, but Dan Aykroyd and Justin Timberlake's Yogi and Boo Boo are fun enough. It's fine. In 2021, the HBO Max streaming service would bring Yogi and the larger extended Hanna-Barbera cast back for Jellystone, a somewhat manic but very fun romp. And that's the Yogi Bear story. But what did it all mean for Nickelodeon to have Yogi Bear for the short sliver of time they did? Back in the earliest days of Jerry Laybourne's tenure as president, Nickelodeon's philosophy for television imports, and especially their animated imports, were to find things you couldn't get anywhere else, like foreign television or true syndication obscurities. That changed in 1987 with the acquisition of Inspector Gadget, a modern, mainstream cartoon that you could still catch reruns on your local network affiliate. This opened things up. Nickelodeon started allowing itself shows that already had hard marquee value, shows that you could easily watch elsewhere. Hence, Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon. Now that makes perfect sense as a title. You can watch Looney Tunes pretty much anywhere, so making a distinction was important. These are the Looney Tunes you can watch on Nickelodeon. But it also began a trend of Nickelodeon claiming these imported shows as, well, belonging to them. Nickelodeon's Most Wanted Yogi Bear is probably the most extreme example of this, and I wonder if this was a branding they could have carried over to other cartoons. Nickelodeon's Most Wanted, Rocky and Bullwinkle, Nickelodeon's Most Wanted, Gumby, that sort of thing. Now that didn't happen, but for these retro cartoons, Nick did find ways to put their brand front and center, oftentimes plastering their logo over the traditional openings of these old cartoons. And originally it was just the old cartoons. They didn't do this kind of thing for Muppet Babies or Beetlejuice. Keyword being originally. The most infamous example of this kind of thing would occur in 2000 with their run of Pinky and the Brain, where the intro is altered to the point of absurdity. The intent is clear. When you think of these popular cartoon characters and mainstream IPs, Nickelodeon wants you to think of them first, even if they had nothing to do with the actual cartoons besides paying for the syndication rights. When you see a Yogi Bear t-shirt, they want you to think, oh hey, Yogi Bear, that Nickelodeon cartoon. Yogi Bear cartoons themselves are fun and relaxing to watch, but Nickelodeon's Most Wanted, Yogi Bear specifically, has a cynical corporate edge to it, a claim of ownership that is hardly earned, and would be oh so quickly taken away. Nickelodeon's Most Wanted, Yogi Bear, would end after a near 3-year run on September 11th, 1993. The syndication contract had run through, and no way Turner was going to let Nickelodeon renew it. The show was a good time. I recall watching it fairly often. Yogi Bear has a timeless quality to him, a simplicity of premise that allowed him to be many things for many situations. The capitalism is cynical, but the cartoons are classic.
Nick, 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 Nickelodeon. Nick, 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 Nickelodeon.
Next time, Nickelodeon returns to the world of anime with the adventures of a cute little bee girl, based on a book written by a Nazi. Oh boy! I have 2 complimentary books for today's research shout-out, My Life in Tunes by Joseph Barbera, and A Cast of Friends by William Hanna. Both books cover mostly the same ground, but from different perspectives of the 2 different men, giving you a very 3-dimensional look at Hanna-Barbera and the people running it. Thank you all for watching. If you'd like to support Knacks and other Pop Arena projects, consider contributing to my Patreon. Every dollar goes to production values, research materials, and meds. Remember, if we get the Patreon up to $1,000 a vid, I'll start covering Nick at Night show by show. You can also support the channel by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, sending a one-time donation through PayPal or Coffee, following me on Twitter, and sharing Knacks with all your friends. I'll see you next time, and remember, Black Lives Matter.